Russell Wilson had an absolute nightmare of a season in 2022, but like the most insidious, twisted nightmares often do, it began as a wonderful dream. Wilson and the Denver Broncos had agreed to terms on a massive deal with Seattle that would benefit all parties involved. The Seahawks would receive 3 players from Denver, plus 5 draft picks, 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, and a 5th rounder over the next 2 years. Wilson would receive a 7-year contract worth up to $296 million, making him the second highest paid quarterback in the league. He would also finally get out of Coach Pete Carroll's shadow and show the world that his stellar career had been a product of his own talent, not Seattle's system or Carroll's coaching. The Denver Broncos would receive a 4th-round pick and Russell Wilson, which would allow them to step off of the disastrous quarterback carousel they had been riding since Peyton Manning retired. And with new head coach Nathaniel Hackett taking the reins, Denver was finally going to escape the AFC West cellar and contend for championships again. Then, over the course of the 2022 season, but seemingly in an instant, the dream took a turn. The nightmare started with a narrow 1-point road loss to Wilson's former team and coach, which was a sign of how the season would unfold. They would go on to split their divisional series with the Chargers, 1 game apiece, but were swept by the Raiders and Chiefs. Overall, they won 5 games, 2 fewer than the year before, marking their 6th straight losing season. By the end of the inaugural year of the Russell Wilson era in Denver, the Broncos were trapped in the AFC West basement for the 3rd consecutive season and the 4th time in 6 years. They missed the postseason for the 7th straight time. The offense struggled mightily under the new coach, staff, and quarterback. They were dead last in the league in scoring, with an abysmal 16.9 points per game. Wilson struggled individually as well, coming in 13th in pass yards, 17th in yards per attempt, 36th in completion percentage at 60.5. He threw only 16 touchdowns, good for 20th in the league, while throwing 11 interceptions, tied for the 10th most. His passer rating of 84.4 was 27th, and he took 55 sacks, the most of his career so far, and tied for 1st in the league. The nightmare continues when we compare Wilson's Denver numbers to his career averages with the Seahawks. While in Seattle, his completion percentage was almost 5 points higher, and his average yards per attempt were significantly higher at 7.8 compared to 7.3 with Denver. Wilson's touchdown to interception ratio was massively better with Seattle, sitting at 3.35 to 1 versus 1.45 to 1 with Denver. His passer rating as a Seahawk was a full 18 points higher. That is huge. The nightmare becomes even more terrifying when we compare Wilson's 2022 numbers to what was arguably his best season, 2015 in Seattle. He had a full 500 more passing yards in 15 than in 22, and averaged a full yard more on each attempt. His completion percentage was nearly 8 points higher, while throwing more than double the number of touchdowns. He even had fewer interceptions while doing it, making his touchdown to interception ratio staggeringly better. His passer rating that season was over 25 points higher than 2022, sitting at 110.1 versus 84.4, which is a monumental difference. For context, a passer rating gap that wide is equivalent to the difference between Josh Allen and Zach Wilson. Yes, that Zach Wilson, the Jets quarterback. 2015 Russ is to 2022 Russ as Josh Allen is to Zach Wilson. Let that sink in. This nightmare version of Russell Wilson even managed to be a downgrade compared to the 2-headed quarterback monster the Broncos deployed the year before, being outplayed by that duo in many statistical categories and, as mentioned previously, winning fewer games. But in perhaps the strangest, most mind-boggling part of this nightmare, Wilson's former backup, Geno Smith, completely outplayed Russ in Seattle. Not only did he produce a season very similar to Wilson's Seattle career, but Smith managed to gain more passing yards than Russell Wilson ever did in a single season while with the Seahawks. Smith also completed a higher percentage of his passes than Wilson ever did as a Seahawk, and to add insult to injury, Seattle made the playoffs. It was a nightmare season for everyone but the Broncos' opponents, and Russell Wilson definitely deserves his fair share of the blame for it. But consider this: Denver's offensive line was easily the worst in the league. Russell Wilson was pressured 162 times, second only to Kirk Cousins. If Wilson had played all 17 games, he would have faced pressure on 184 occasions. In fact, he was under pressure on 28.6% of his dropbacks, first in the league. No quarterback faced more pressure than Russell Wilson in 2022. He was hurried 42 times, sixth most in the league. However, once again, had he played all 17 games, he would have ranked third. Wilson absorbed 65 hits, which was third most behind Cousins with 84 and Justin Herbert with 72. Had he not missed any games, Wilson likely would have been second with 74 hits absorbed. And now for the sacks. Wilson took 55 sacks, which tied the Bears' Justin Fields for most in the league. This was the most punishment Wilson had absorbed in any single season of his career. It would have been 62 in a full season, but as it stands, out of the 750 or so players who have ever started at quarterback in the Super Bowl era of the NFL, only 14 of them have taken more sacks in a single season than Wilson did in 2022. Put another way, Russell Wilson took more punishment that season than 98% of all NFL quarterbacks. I'm not making excuses for Wilson, however. This chart shows that 4 signal callers, including Wilson, faced comparable amounts of pressure and punishment. And this chart shows how they handled it in terms of production. So yeah, terrible offensive line, but Russ didn't play his best ball either. On top of the O-line problems, the Broncos' running game was average at best, which put even more pressure on the passing game. And on that note, where were Wilson's wideouts? Wilson's top receivers, Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, were numbers 40 and 45 respectively in terms of receptions. They were number 23 and 34 in receiving yards. Wilson's former favorite targets, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, were 12th and 19th in the league in receptions, respectively. They were 16th and 19th in receiving yardage. Additionally, Wilson was tied for 8th in the league in drop percentage. This means that fully 75% of quarterbacks last season enjoyed more reliable receivers than Russell did. According to Pro Football Reference, Wilson's bad throw percentage was 15.6%, which was 17th in the league, middle of the pack. 2022 MVP, Super Bowl champion, and the best player in the league, Patrick Mahomes, posted a 15.4% bad throw rating, virtually identical to Wilson's. And then there was the coaching. It seemed like first-year head coach Nathaniel Hackett was out of his element in his new role even from week 1. He didn't make it through the season, eventually being fired the day after a shocking 14-51 defeat at the hands of Baker, Mayfield, and the Rams, a team who had looked equally as hapless as the Broncos prior to dismantling them on Christmas. Hackett compiled a record of 4-11 as head coach. In the aftermath of this disaster, the Broncos spent $81 million combined in guaranteed money for left guard Ben Powers and right tackle Mike McGlinchey to overhaul their abysmal offensive line and provide Wilson with much-needed protection. They also drafted center Alex Forsyth to either add depth or challenge for a starting role. Denver hopes to keep its playmakers healthy and involved moving forward, and they also managed to lure legendary head coach Sean Payton out of retirement. Payton is known as a quarterback whisperer and an offensive genius, with a record of 152 wins and 89 losses as a head coach, for a winning percentage of .630, which makes him a current top 5 coach in terms of win percentage. His 152 career victories are more than Denver's previous 8 coaches combined. And while Russell Wilson's numbers in 2022 were horrible, they just might be an anomaly, a perfect storm of coincidence aligning to produce a prolific quarterback's worst season. Is there a light at the end of this tunnel? Or will the nightmare continue in 2023?